that are going to be joining us as we go. So we are quite honored today to have Prof. Julie, who is going to be presenting to us today on a very important book that she recently published, and the talk today is going to be coming from the book. So Prof. Julie Yu-Wen Chen is a professor of Chinese studies at the University of Helsinki, where she leads research and teaching on contemporary China. She has also served as a visiting professor at the Research Institute for Languages and Cultures of Asia and at Mohiro University in Thailand. And Prof. Julie is one of the hosts for a popular Nordic Asia podcast. And she's the author of a number of articles, as well as the recent book, Global Knowledge Production About China, which was published by Leiden University Press. And she has published in peer-reviewed academic journals, a number of them, such as Globalizations, Problems of Post-Communism, Journal of Chinese Political Science, Ethnic and Racial Studies, as well as Asia-Europe Journal and Asian Survey. So without further ado, I think let me allow Prof to get us started.
Thank you, Simba, for introducing me and to your audience. It's very nice to meet everybody online. So as you have heard, I'm a professor of Chinese studies. I would like to kind of explain a bit of who I am a bit further, because I think it's very important when we do research, we identify our positionality, acknowledging that inevitably where we come from and where we are situated sometimes may influence the way we write our academic projects. So, as you can see, I have a Chinese name. I'm originally from Taiwan, but I have been working as I would say, nomadic scholars in various countries in different continents in the world. And eventually, I managed to settle down in Finland about 11 years ago and working as a professor of Chinese studies in a small country called Finland. And basically, that means I have to take care of anything related to China, which is impossible and very ambitious, because it's impossible one person knows everything about China. In a way, this new book, which has just been published, it's a kind of the journey I have walked through, and looking back and looking at what is going on in the world nowadays, that a lot of countries are deeply engaged with China. And in fact, and there are a lot of scholars or experts of various sorts are talking about China. So I think all of us more or less have some kind of knowledge about China, but how this knowledge is being produced sometimes is questionable. And I think nowadays there's a lot of discussions of the political connection between knowledge that we know about China. In the West, for instance, I think in the US more clearly with this geopolitical competition with China, scholars have been feeling that a lot of issues related to education about China itself has been politicalized. And then even scholars feel that, the way they narrate about China face certain political constraints in the West. So I think we are facing a very interesting moment in history. But my ambition is to look at whether this moment that we are experiencing is so unique, or whether it actually has been there throughout decades, if not centuries. And so it's kind of a bit of answering to what is going on to the world, a bit of answering to myself, because I myself am some kind of a narrator of China knowledge based in Finland. And this book, just to let you know, it's just been published, and it's so expensive that I don't think people will want to buy it. The good news is, though, this book is completely free online. So I'm not so sure if Simba has shared with you, but if not, we could share again that there is a link on Gestor website, and you can completely download the whole book and read it in a digital way. So I hope that, because I was thinking, if I only write academic, hello. So I was thinking if I only publish a book that people cannot easily access, and it's only a collection for university libraries, then I cannot have genuine dialogue with, the readers around the world. But I really want to have genuine dialogue with the readers around the world, because we are talking about global knowledge production about China. Okay. I hope it's okay that I continue my presentation, Simpa. I hear some noise.
Yes, so
Okay.
sorry about that. Sorry about that. Let me attend to that.
Yeah. Okay, so I will just with this background, then I would like to introduce this new book. In case you have not read it yet, no problem. I think today's presentation exactly will give me the opportunity to show you the layout and the motive behind writing this book. And if you're interested after listening to my presentations, you may feel free to download it online and even only check the chapters or the sub chapters that might interest you. And well, I know that the title, the cover of this book might stun you a bit because there are a lot of Chinese words, and don't be afraid of it. Let me explain. Actually, the book was not written in Chinese at all. And the reason I use this interesting cover, so this, can you see my second slide now, Simba?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so great, thank you. So I would like to explain why I use this cover in that book. And in fact, this is related to again, I'm trying to show the from from the past to present how our knowledge about China is being produced by which actor in which kind of institution and under which context. In fact, once you have read the book, you will realize that the current what you call a politicalization of the knowledge production about China and how China is being embedded in this whole thing. To be honest, I think from the past to present, we have seen a lot of similar patterns, even though they are not the same. In fact, this is not the first time that mankind has experienced this. But then the cover of this book, well, it actually this is actually a book that has been collected in the University of Naples in L'Oriental in Italy. And the story actually dates back to the 17th and 18th century, when you might recall that the Catholics, they had this mission to Jesuit missionary. They went to China trying to preach the Christian gospels to the Chinese. But at one point, this Matteo Ripa, as you can see on the slide, he was one of the Jesuit missionary. He was successful in the sense that the emperor entrusted him to welcome him to the Chinese empire. He was imparting knowledge about Christianity as well as various kind of scientific knowledge to the Chinese emperor. But that kind of success did not last long. The Chinese emperor decided to kind of kick out the missionaries. So Matteo Ripa had to bring back, whatever he had achieved in China back to Italy, where he came from. He brought back a lot of books. And nowadays, these were all collected in this university in Italy. As you can see in the pictures, a lot of things that he has collected when he was in China. At the same time, he actually brought back 4 Chinese with him, with the idea that he will go back to Italy, set up the first institute. Actually, that was the first institute of Chinese studies in the whole in the whole Europe. And nowadays, we can also translate it as a College of the Chinese and use that institute to translate a lot of Christian ideas into Chinese language. At the same time, training the 4 Chinese that he has brought back with him to Italy, training them and hoping that they will become seeds of spreading the Christianity in the future. So actually, with that background, that Chinese institute, that kind of not really a academic institution, or you could say a quasi academic institution, it actually became today's University of Nepal L'Oriental in Italy, and where they have a very vibrant Chinese study as well as Asian studies. And so what I want to say is that the first kind of the Chinese Study Institute in Europe was embedded with a motive, with a European perhaps or a Christian motive to preach Christianity in China. And then because of the obstacles they faced, they brought it back to Italy, and then they founded this institution. So the motive has always been there. But in this instance where I show you in the book cover it's a religious motive. And my book actually, now you can see this third chapter where I laid out all the chapters, the third slide where I laid out all the chapters in the book. Actually, the book begins with that I'm trying to find out the motives of different societies, different countries, how they started to create knowledge about China. So what I call knowledge production about China. The players, of course, are very complex, not just the formal educational institutions. It could be also led by journalists, could be led by diplomats, could be led by non-governmental individuals who are very keen in narrating about China in their own societies and countries. So the book actually is composed of three main parts. You can see in the yellow color here, the first one I show you is China Watchers, the agency and diversity. So I spent several chapters in this big session talking about the diversities of possible agents who are all narrating or producing knowledge about China. I will explain a bit more later on, but now I just want to show you the different sections. So the second section, which is also marked by yellow color on this slide, I talk about the structure where those China Watchers operate. So individuals do not operate in a vacuum, and they always are kind of operating in a society, in the institution. The institution could be a political institution, could be the educational institution that we are working in. So the structures also would give you opportunity as well, probably constrain the China Watchers, how much they can produce knowledge about China. So there's a big section about the structure. And then at the third section, I go back to a bigger issue, and it's related to what I have discussed in the previous chapter. I realized that so much we are facing now, the politicalization and securitization of the knowledge that we can produce about China. And I try to find solutions, and I have to admit the solutions are not perfect. But the last two chapters of this book, where I talk about Taiwan, and then the last chapter is about the global China, I was talking about perhaps we should further globalize and transnationalize knowledge production about China, and trying to move away from the political conundrum that many China watchers are facing nowadays. So this is kind of the architecture of my book. And if you're okay with this, now I will go into more details of certain chapters. Because the time is short, I don't think I can go into every details, but I want to just kind of highlight some of the key points I find in my book, and I would like to have interaction with the audience later on. And if you allow me, so now I will go to the kind of the first part where I talk about the diversity of China actors. And this part is actually fascinating enough. So I will now turn to my next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, the next slide, actually first I have to explain a bit of my methodology. So the methodology that I have used is largely oral history interviews, which was led by not by me, but by my teacher, my former teacher, Professor Shi, at National Taiwan University. He has a very ambitious project, a global project that interview senior China experts around the world. So it's in line with the ambition of my book, which is global. But I have to admit that none of us have really achieved interview in all corners of the world. We try as much as we can, but there are certain countries that we still, until today, have not collected the oral history interviews. I will show you some examples later on. So most of these are oral history interviews with senior China experts who have lived long enough in their life to have a wider perspective of how the interest in China was aroused in their country and how that evolved in their own societies. And then this was supplemented by further interviews that conducted by me, semi-structured and unstructured interviews that conducted by me, because I realized Professor Shi's data did not cover everywhere, and as much as I can, I try to expand the geographical scope. That is why I conducted further interviews. And I also consulted, of course, standard academic literature, news reports, think tank policy reports. The CNKI I listed here, this is just a famous Chinese database where they store a lot of e-journals. So I also not just consult English language reports, I also consult Chinese language reports to balance the view in my book. So this is the research methods. I apologize that this slide is written in Chinese, but basically it shows you where all the oral history interviews were stored on the website at Professor Shiju's website. And you can see the hyperlink here, www.chinastudies.taipei. And although the website is in Chinese, luckily, whenever we record the data, so the different countries' oral history interviews, usually there is an English version of the interview. But depending on country, we could also have the Chinese version of the oral history interview, or like the slide has shown you here, I mark Kazakhstan, which is a country in Central Asia, in red color. So because they speak Russian, so we also have the original Russian language oral history interview transcript. And here it just show you different countries that where we have conducted the interviews. Actually, Japan was the first country that was being investigated on, because Japan, being a close neighbor with China, historically has a lot of interaction with China. So there are a lot of scholars being interviewed in Japan, but then we slowly expand to different continents. Well, here you probably don't see African countries, but I have written down on my notes here which African countries were covered in the oral history interviews. In case the audience is interested, I can quickly read them through. So Togo, Nigeria, Mali, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Egypt, Burkina Faso, Benin. Unfortunately, there were no countries covered in southern part of the Africa, but I myself have conducted interview with scholars in Zambia. I tried to reach out to scholars to Zimbabwe, didn't manage. If anybody can help me with the contact there, I would appreciate. And I also acknowledge the data is really incomplete, in the sense we didn't have South Africa, which is of course a very important player, I think, in knowledge producer, in serving as a knowledge producer of China nowadays. So the data is limited, but we did our best. So here now, I show you chapter 2 here, the diversity of China watchers. Actually, as an interesting way, to kind of attract readers to think about the diversity of watchers, I on purpose ask some interesting questions here. For instance, there is a chapter 2.3.1. I talk about China watchers who cannot speak Chinese with a question mark, and then China experts who have never been to China with a question mark. Hello. Yeah, well, I don't want to have a kind of a monologue with myself. So I just wonder, for our audience now, you have been listening for me for a while, for a few minutes. I wonder if anybody here in the audience can tell me if you have known any China experts who cannot speak Chinese or who have never been to China. I don't know. This is not meant to shame anybody. Actually, I will have to admit this is very normal. I'm just wondering if anybody in the audience today, you happen to know anybody who are China experts and who cannot speak Chinese or have never been to China. Anybody want to share your thoughts before I continue? Okay, a bit of silence here. No worry. Okay, if there is silence anyway, I can still continue. Simba, are you still hearing me?
Yes. I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I just make sure the internet is good so I can continue. Thank you. All right. So, in fact, this is very common, believe me or not, China experts who cannot speak Chinese. And one of the reason is it depends on the disciplinary training. you know, in the old days when China study become a field itself in higher education, particularly I think in the West, the original idea of China studies more about studying the Chinese language, Chinese literature, Chinese philosophy, and all of this, of course, require the training of Chinese language. But as the field diversify, and in the modern era where a lot of social science fields have jointly contribute to the knowledge production about China, for instance, we find out, of course, sociologists or economists or political scientists or legal experts coming from various disciplines with an interest in China. Their training might emphasize a lot in their own discipline, such as economics, sociology, business management, political science, etc., and leading to the fact that maybe the experts themselves are not necessarily trained in Chinese language because their expertise focus more on their own disciplines training. And they often, these kind of experts also try to treat China as a comparison. So for instance, a political scientist trying to study authoritarian regimes, comparing authoritarian regimes in different parts of the world, or studying democratizations, they only treat China as a comparison, as a case that probably can test or validate certain political science theories. And because of this context, the Chinese language training is not necessary. So in fact, we see a lot of examples here. Here I have one slide, this Henry Junawan. He is a Chinese diaspora, I mean, who has settled down with his ancestors living in Indonesia. He himself also does not speak Chinese, but he's a Chinese diaspora. Only later part in his life, he started to trace his root back to China. He went back to China to learn language. So this is also possible that somebody like a Chinese diaspora who has settled down in different countries around the world, actually they might not be familiar with the Chinese language because the priority is to learn the language where they have become an immigrant to. So for instance, this Henry was in Indonesia. But later on, he kind of picked up the language again. Another interesting question I have posed here is it, have you known any China experts who have never been to China? Surprisingly, yes, in history, we also have these kind of experts. So this Professor Alexander Pisarev on my slide here on the right, during the Soviet era, he is a Soviet scholar. During the Soviet era, when China and Soviet Union had very difficult relations politically, actually, the Soviet Union was very eager to study China because of the political necessity to understand its neighbor. But at the same time, it was impossible for the scholars in the Soviet Union to travel to China. So Alexander Pisarev, in his oral history interview, he expressed that actually he was already an associate professor in his own university, but he had never been to China. One time when he gave a talk, I think it was popular at that time for scholars, China experts, to share knowledge about China around the Soviet Union. So he was giving a talk to some audience somewhere in the Soviet Union, and one audience raised the hand and asked him, "Hey, so how does a beer can looks like in China? Do you know?" And then he actually couldn't answer because he had never been to China. It was only later part in his life when Russia and Soviet Union's relationship improved with China, he was able to embark on his first trip to China, and he realized that the beer can in China looks the same, exactly like the one that they will find in the Soviet Union. So in the book, I give a lot of interesting examples to show the diversity of China watchers. And perhaps disproportionately, I do focus a lot on scholars or quasi-scholar, people who have been a scholar, but sometimes also working as journalists or politicians in different societies. And these diversities of experts, they all contribute to our knowledge about China. An important concept that I have tried to raise in this book is that our knowledge about China is in fact conditioned by an epistemological relationship with China. Sorry for this terminology, but allow me to explain what I mean. the book has a lot of stress on that. In fact, our knowledge about China is not because there's a China out there as a neutral knowledge, and then we just absorb all the knowledge through books or through whatever we read in the media, and then understand China as such. In fact, a lot of China experts that we have done interview with, we realize that their knowledge about China and the reason that they become some sort of China expert in their own society is through an accumulation of epistemological relationship with China, and which means epistemological means that their experiences with China of various sorts. And to give examples, you can see in the chapter, in second chapter here, I marked in yellow color. For instance, some scholars, through learning the language and through translating Chinese language and with their own language, through that kind of translation, they have one step towards understanding China, towards being Sinalized. So not Sinalized to become like a Chinese person, but to know more about China. So translation is a way for them to become closer to China. Another example I use in the book is the ethnic Chinese. So, for instance, I mentioned this Henry in Indonesia. So he was an ethnic Chinese who settled down in Indonesia. So this ethnic Chinese, through their because they are now living in a different countries, but then they are living very close to a Chinese diaspora community. So through this kind of immigration experience, diaspora experiences, they re-synthesize themselves to understand China. So even though they have roots back in China because of the immigration, there was a rupture in their experience about China. Some of them, like this Henry in Indonesia, he didn't even speak Chinese language, Mandarin Chinese language to begin with. But then he has to refamiliar himself with China through the language learning and through the involvement, interaction with the diaspora community in Indonesia. So this is one example. Another example is the journey to the East, and the journey, I think journeys are very important for all of us as scholars, as learners of different knowledges. Each trip brings you a new knowledge. So journey to the East refers to, I think I used the example of the Iranians in the Middle East. Several Iranian scholars, they conducted educational training in China. They traveled to China, and through that experience, they become experts. And actually, in the book, I also talk about Journey to America, which was quite popular. I think still very popular. Like early days, a lot of people actually received education in America when America was a very important stronghold during the Cold War, as a Cold War stronghold, because with the intentions kind of to understand the communist enemies, America created a lot of educational institutions to train knowledge, and also a lot of journalists were contributing to this China watching. So in fact, there was also a wave of scholars trying to get their educational training in America, and through that they get to understand China. So in fact, each individuals have their individual story of getting that distance from not knowing China and closer to China. So it's an epistemological relationship. Now I move to the next slide. Knowledge production about China is epistemological. And then in the book, I further show examples in different countries. For instance, chapter 3 is focused on Southeast Asia. Chapter 4 focused on Central Asia. And there were different patterns of how the Chinese studies were developed simply because of the actors there. They have different epistemological relationship with China. Well, here, I'm not going to tell you everything about chapter 3 and chapter 4, but I give you one example of chapter 3, which I think is very interesting because Southeast Asia has a lot of Chinese diasporas. Historically, Chinese people living in China, mainland China, because of the fear of war or because of the looking for better economic opportunities, they have migrated to Southeast Asia. and therefore there were different historical waves of migrations. And with that, interestingly, there's a huge population, diaspora population there. And then that diaspora, as I mentioned earlier on already, diaspora, through their diasporic connections with the motherland, through their personal motivation to reconnect with China, they have developed, I would say, a very, very vibrant China studies there. And so there's a scholar, Hong Liu, based in Singapore. He speaks of Sino-Southeast Asian study as an alternative paradigm to conventional studies of China. And several other Chinese diaspora in Southeast Asia, like Caroline Howe, also endorsed that, to say, well, in Southeast Asia, because of this unique historical connection with China, they have now really have a very fruitful contribution to the knowledge, to China study, to narrating knowledge about China. But one has to say that this is a Sino-Southeast Asian study, because very often when those scholars are talking about China, they are also talking about Southeast Asia themselves. For instance, Caroline Howe, she is a she's a Chinese diaspora in the Philippines. So whenever she talked about China, she's actually contributing her knowledge about China from a Filipino perspective. A very interesting thing I mentioned in the book is also the difference between scientific Chineseness versus sinological Chineseness. So in the book, I give, let me clarify these two terms first. So scientific Chineseness, sorry for this term, it means that an expert, a China expert, himself or herself, is trying to, even though himself or herself might have a lot of knowledge about the Chinese language, Chinese culture, but in order to kind of legitimize himself or herself as an expert, a China expert in the new country where they live in, such as Vietnam, such as the Philippines, or such as the Thailand or Southeast Asian countries, they have decided that they will keep a distance from that Chinese, that their knowledge about China, they keep a distance about it, to show a more neutral, scientific understanding of China. And I think this is clear in a lot of Southeast Asian scholars, Chinese scholars we have interviewed, because they want to establish themselves as a legitimate authority of China expert in their new country. So they want to show a bit of distance from China. They want to present a more scientific knowledge, and with the aim to also show their new societies that they can contribute contribute very objective knowledge, and contribute perhaps also policy advice to their new countries, such as Vietnam or the Philippines or Thailand. So this is very different from what I call a sinological Chineseness. So sinological Chineseness are scholars who really immerse themselves into the learning of the Chinese language, the culture, and sometimes they might be understood as they are very close to China itself, and then kind of there is a too much in it. Sometimes they will be misunderstood as having a political sympathy towards the Chinese government. So you can see in Southeast Asia, in the case study I have conducted in my book, that it seems that a lot of China experts in Southeast Asia are more leaning towards scientific Chineseness than sinological Chineseness, because they want to show that they are distant from it. And of course, behind that motive is there's a political motive. They don't want to be misunderstood as being politically too sympathetic to the Chinese government or to the communist regime of China. So Southeast Asia is very interesting. In my book, there's another chapter focused on Central Asia. I think due to limited time, I'm not going to delve into more about it. I think perhaps our audience today are not that interested, so I will just skip this slide, and then I will move on then to talk about the second big part of my book, the structures. So the structures where the China Watchers operate. And individuals do not operate in vacuum. So even though all the experts have their own individual interests, motive, and journeys, travels that kind of move them closer to China, and thus become some kind of China expert in their own societies, inevitably they are also very constrained by the structure they operate in. So chapter 6 of my book, which is called Continuities and Ruptures in Knowledge Production about China. So I give different examples of how there may be continuities, there may be ruptures in the structure that those actors operate in. Continuities, I give an example. For instance, here there's one slide. Then I look into Latin America, where I find also a lot of interesting examples because Latin America had colonial experience from the Europeans. And very often the way they understand China or understand the Orient, a very vaguely conceived Orient itself, is influenced by this kind of epistemology, which is related back to the European colonial powers. And they inherit a lot of this from the European powers. But then in the more modern time, Latin America are also influenced by influenced by their neighboring North America, particularly United States, in how they see China. So it seems that from what I see in Latin America, a lot of examples of the influence. So this is what I mean, a continuity is that this colonial imperial influence, how the colonial European colonial empire look at the Orient, look at Asia or look at China, becomes the foundations of how Latin American countries know China. So, for instance, I interview this David Ibarra from Costa Rica. He was telling me, and you can see that actually he's quite a young China expert. And he did his PhD in China. But then when he went back to Costa Rica, and to start his job as a history lecturer in Costa Rica, he realized that he cannot really create his own curriculum. So when he's teaching about China, he's still teaching a curriculum that was used like 3 decades ago when the first professors was teaching about Asia in a very general term and understand Asia or Orient as a very general term. So even he is trained as a China expert, he became a person who has to inherit this curriculum and to impart China within kind of in this existing curriculum. Yeah, so this is what I mean. And it is very difficult. Actually, this kind of continuity of epistemology is very difficult to make breakthrough. So even until today in Costa Rica, I think there is no standing alone China knowledge China studies in the university there. And if there is anything, probably is from the so-called Confucius Institute that contribute investment to the training of Mandarin language in particular in Costa Rica. So this continuity is very, very vivid. And then my book, I also talk about the ruptures. Sometimes the continuity could be rupture. So I use various examples from before the Cold War, during the Cold War, and then after the Cold War. So examples like, as I mentioned already, the United States during the Cold War has contributed a lot of resources into the setup of China studies because they want to observe China, the communist China, with the political ambition, of course, to understand its enemy and perhaps to kind of undermine the enemy. So the Cold War era, everything, whoever is doing China studies is embedded in this political structure. Very often, you can also see perhaps spies, intelligence officers are also contributing knowledge about China with a very strong motive. After the Cold War, of course, there was a period of time, I think things become more normalized. Scholars no longer need to think about these political motivations when they do research about China. But then very quickly in my book, I start to talk about the contemporary challenge that we are facing in chapter 7. It's called securitization of China knowledge. So I think this is in conjunction with China, the rise of China, and with the United States that realizing that it's really competing with this rising power. And nowadays, a lot of things are being looked at from a securitized lenses and looking at China potentially as a risk as a threat. So in the West, namely America and I would say Canada as well, in Europe, and also with also countries like in Japan, in India, they all have securitized China knowledge. So there are various examples I've mentioned in the book, various policy papers laying out that if you are doing research about China, you have to clarify that you are not receiving funding from China, or you are not cooperating with Chinese cooperators. There are all sorts of constraints nowadays, making the production of knowledge about China more. There's a political stress on it, and the book has a long chapter about securitization. I don't think I have time to go through it, but I think the audience here might experience some sort of the securitization and politicization, which we can discuss in the Q&A part. So I'm going to move a bit fast. So there was I just use one example here where I'm based in Finland, that even our Finnish government have produced a long document indicating what we should do when we conduct research on China and interacting with Chinese cooperators. So this is securitizations. The book also mentioned this is not just something in the West, in the liberal West. In fact, even the book mentioned an example in Kazakhstan, which is an authoritarian regime, where scholars has been jailed, and for maybe opaque reasons, but one suspicion, this is Konstantin Shirozkin, is a very known China expert in Kazakhstan. He was jailed for treasons, and there were a lot of rumors saying that perhaps he has been co-opted by the Chinese government, and then the Kazakh government treated that as a high security issue, therefore he was jailed. But the whole trial was very not transparent, so the book has limit to make too much inferences about this case. I move very fast because I realize the time is running out. To conclude, though, I'm moving towards the end of my book. I was talking about, yes, I take the political risk. Those policy papers that has been proposed by various governments as valid, and as things that we should take seriously. But then, as a scholar who is doing research on China, I inevitably, of course, I feel very constrained by those political policy papers. Sometimes my over securitize China, so everything is being looked at security lenses. You will feel that it's not that easy for you to conduct a genuine cooperation or interaction with the Chinese cooperators in China anymore, and that restricts also my capacity to visit China to conduct interviews with Chinese interviewees. So in order to make breakthrough from this, towards the end, I proposed a transnational approach in understanding China as well as Taiwan. If you're interested in Taiwan, we can have more discussion later. And honestly, this is a very humble proposal, which cannot address the entire problem, but it's a humble proposal. So, for instance, at the end of the book, I have this figure here, and let me explain. Because I argue that, in fact, a lot of study of China has been deeply locked with different knowledge realm, different disciplines already. I gave you already the example of Southeast Asia, where there is a very distinct Sino-Southeast Asian studies. But then even, for instance, in this figure, you can see the African study, China-African study, or you can say African-China studies, has been a very successful example. Where you can see people conducting research about China and Africa's relationship. You have seen vivid examples in the African continent as well, in Europe, in North America, even in China. I think the interlocking of the different disciplines, different knowledge realms has been very vivid. Maybe Latin America also has a bit of that. And Central Asia, which was covered in my book, maybe is a bit weaker. So I see that there are strong examples of where the interlocking of knowledge has been there. And what we should do towards the end of my book, I was advocating that we should consider interacting more with all these different continents and different countries and these different disciplines to transnationalize the way we study China. So the China we study nowadays is no longer the China which is called People's Republic of China in that country, not confined in that territorial limits anymore. But we should understand China by interacting with scholars in African studies, in Latin American study, etc., etc. And with this kind of what is called cross fertilizations of different ideas, different epistemologies, hopefully that it will enrich our understanding of China. So I would like to conclude my presentation this way, and I welcome questions from all directions as the book covers many, many topics. And perhaps my slides did not capture all of them, but I welcome the discussion with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julie, for that fascinating presentation, and I'm really impressed by how you covered all the chapters within 40 minutes. So thank you very much for that. Let me open this up for questions, comments, and also engagements. Colleagues, are there any questions, any comments that you might want to throw in? Maybe we can take 3 or 4 questions, and then we allow Julie to respond. And then after that, we take the second round of questions. Yes, I see Tokoloho. Go ahead. Tokoloho, can you unmute yourself? Go ahead. Unfortunately, we cannot hear you, Tokoloho. I think it must be a technical issue.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me now, Professor?
Yes.
All
Go
right.
ahead.
Thank you so much for that talk, Professor Yuli. Very informative. The very first thing that came to mind with you in the process of conducting these interviews and the censorship that is to be expected. How does that translate in your life with regards to safety? Are you, wherever you are in the world, are you safe? Is this something that kind of follows you around? And what's the nature of security in your life as you conduct these kinds of interviews? Yes. That's my question.
Okay, thank you. And I also see there's a question in the chat, so I will respond to both comments here. Regarding the safety, because it depends on where the country is. I don't think I face the security problem in all countries. There was no problem to do interview in Japan or in some European countries, but for instance, when I did interviews in certain Central Asian countries where they also have authoritarian regimes, where talking about China is a very politically sensitive issues. Oh yes, I did have a lot of problems. There was one time I was doing interview in one Central Asian countries. Basically, in the middle of the interview, one supervisor came in and asked, "Are you talking about China?" And basically that kind of ruined the whole plan, because I understood I'm in an authoritarian country and I probably should not, I should really be careful. So I only had an informal chat with the interviewee. And I think the data was kind of a compromise through because of this difficulty in conducting a genuine interview in that country. So this is one example, but I don't feel threat too much when I'm operating in the West. Also, when I'm sharing the book with audience, I generally don't feel the threat. But of course, if I'm going to give a presentation on this very topic to Chinese audience based in China, I think I definitely will probably feel a certain level of constraint because of the censorship issue. I hope I answer your questions. And I also see a comment in the chat here. I did not hear any country from the global south in Africa. Yeah, so first of all, as I mentioned, I read a list of African countries where the oral history interview have managed to reach out and to collect the data. So maybe we can share the link with you later on through SIMPA, so that you can go on the website to see where we have collected data. Unfortunately, though, where we did not reach was Southern Africa. I myself did an interview with a scholar in Zambia, and I think Zambia actually is a very positive example, which I have included in the book, because where they were able to create really a Chinese study in Zambia in another Confucius Institute. So this is kind of impressed me to a certain extent, that they did not use Confucius Institute, but rather they created their own Chinese study programs. And they also hire quite a lot of local scholars to contribute to the program. In addition, of course, they also have hired some international scholars to contribute the program. So Zambia, I found very positive examples. The book, we did not manage to do interview in South Africa, and which I think this is a problem that we have to fix. But the book did mention several examples. For instance, South Africa has several centers that are conducting research about China, and are also used as positive examples, where we can see that different African players have been able to get their own funding and have their own autonomous study about China, and not just being co-opted by other powers such as Chinese Confucius Institute in their way of producing knowledge about China. So I apologize, maybe my oral presentation omit Africa, but the book did not omit Africa. But it's true that I should have more. And with today's discussion, I also hope that I can kind of throw some thread here, that perhaps some of you will contact me later on and give me a hint where you might be able to help me reach out to interviewees in African countries. For instance, I have tried Zimbabwe with no success, so I hope I can kind of fix this problem, and perhaps the result can be presented in my next publication. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Any more questions, colleagues, for Julie? Maybe I can throw in mine as we wait for other colleagues to come in, and I wanted to ask on, I think, something that's interesting that you highlighted on the distinction between scientific Chineseness and sinological Chineseness. And I was just thinking, as you were making the distinctions, to say, in what ways does this kind of distinction maybe challenge, but also at the same time reproduce geopolitical hierarchies of knowledge about China, in the sense that you might have circumstances where there are some people that might get this epistemic authority in this global knowledge production about China, maybe based on whether they are aligned to the scientific Chineseness or the sinological Chineseness. I don't know if you have any thoughts around the distinction between the two.
So Simba, I have to admit my answer to you now might not be the best one. I might have to think through it. But I find out there is a trend in across all countries, even though the slide only show you Southeast Asia. I think there is a trend in across the continent. More and more scholars would like to manifest the scientific Chineseness more than the sinological Chineseness. But there are a small minority, I would say small minority of scholars. I see examples in Vietnam, and this is interesting. Maybe perhaps Vietnam is also a communist regime itself. So some scholars in Vietnam has feel proud that they want to insist that their knowledge is not neutral and scientific, but rather they want to emphasize they have this sinological Chineseness, that they know China inside out, even willing to show inclinations that they are favoring the Chinese system. So if you're asking a hierarchy, that leads me to think that countries that feel more comfortable with the Chinese way of governance, or the communist way of governance, might feel more inclined to show their preference and for the sinological Chineseness. So if there's a hierarchy, I guess the hierarchy is related to whether you are very the maybe you personally, how you think, or the society where you are from are very similar to the Chinese communist kind of regimes, authoritarian kind of regime, and that might influence the way you are more inclined to prefer a sinological Chineseness than scientific Chineseness. This is kind of my temporary thought, might not be very mature. Yeah, but because I can also think of examples where this argument might not be right. Vietnam, I noticed there are some scholars who have this sinological, but for instance, you can think of Central Asia where they also have authoritarian regimes, but I don't think the scholar I have interviewed, I don't think anybody want to show sinological Chineseness, but rather they want to show they have more scientific Chineseness. Yeah. Simpa, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Julie, for that. I don't know, colleagues, any questions, any comments? Yeah, I see Shastri. Shastri has thrown in I think a comment in the chat. But maybe as you are reading, and I was also thinking when I was reading around part of what you talked about, like institutions across the globe, Chinese institutions across the globe. I think there's an increase in the number of Confucius institutes, especially in the global south in Africa. But at the same time, the reverse is sort of happening in Europe, in the US, where there's also this closure of Confucius institutes. And I just wanted to pick your brain with regards to these institutes. Are they becoming, let's say, a symbol of this broader anxiety about China's global rise and how it's projected globally? Do you think that these institutes are evaluated through maybe similar standards as compared to other Western cultural institutions?
Yeah, well, actually, I was a Confucius Institute director in Finland for 7 years, and then eventually we did not renew the agreement. So the Confucius Institute was in my heart for many years, but my book on purpose didn't talk too much about it. I did mention, of course, the existence of Confucius Institute. So to make a long story short, I think the judgment on Confucius Institute, this kind of what you read in the Western media, that this is a Chinese soft power machine. To that extent, yes, it's a soft power machine. But how much the Confucius Institute may interfere in academic freedom, may do other perhaps serious things in the host country, I think a lot of these are mispresented in the Western media. It really, if one has to ask what Confucius Institute is, I think one has to study that institute, how it is being embedded in a certain university, a certain society, and how much power the local university players as well as the local political players may have on the Chinese counterpart. So what I want to say is that the closure in the West is a lot is because of this securitized motive, a lot of fear of the Chinese soft power influence, plus a lot of perhaps serious operations that is going through the Confucius Institute. But I think that the view is biased because in fact, each institute is based on an agreement that a certain Chinese university has signed with a certain local partner university. So in Africa, I cannot even generalize it. It really depends on the agreement that university has signed and whether that local university in certain African countries has a lot of power in negotiating, in deciding how they want to run the institutes. Yeah. And I see another question in the chat. Maybe I can also at the same time answer. And so there's a question about what exactly is the bigger picture you want to present about China in this time. In a way, this book did not present about China. I didn't talk about China. I talk about the China watchers, the players that are narrating about China. In fact, the book did not talk about China, to make a long story short. But of course, I think hidden in the lines, you can hear me saying that the China nowadays is a powerful player that has encouraged the proliferation of actors who all want to express their view about China. So the importance is there, but then I also show there's a lot of awareness of the potential problems from engaging with China, and therefore you see a lot of securitization move as exemplified by my book. So I hope I answer you that the book is not about China, but it's about China watchers. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Yuli, for that response. Yeah, I think we still have about 6 minutes. Colleagues, are there any? Yes, Tokoloho, I see you want to come. Go ahead.
Please pardon me if I missed this in the presentation, but I'm curious about, the kind of motifs that have come out from your interviews, specifically also from like your interviews from Africa. Like, what other motifs that you came across, possibly motifs that we ourselves may kind of observe in our academic journeys? Yeah, that's my question there.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Toko Loho. In fact, I should have said this. Yeah. In fact, I found out in both African continent as well as Latin American continent, a lot of these interviewees, the China experts that we have found, it's unlike the China expert that we can find in, say, in Europe or in Northern America. As I mentioned to you, originally we were trying to find senior China experts, and we got into a problem when we tried to reach out to African countries as well as Latin American countries. We find out that, first of all, it's very difficult to identify a senior China expert. Yeah, and very often what we find is because of that, we try to be flexible, because understanding that the global south has its own developmental path. They don't have the Italian example I show you from 17 centuries ago. The 17th century, there is already a China Institute, right? So to identify an existing senior China expert, we have to be flexible. We lower the age limit. And we also do not limit ourselves to only somebody who is working in a university. We also try to reach out to known journalists who have been narrating about China in Latin America as well as in Africa, also politicians. And it comes maybe not as a surprise. It comes as, like, I think the majority of people we interview, the way they understand China, the way they study China is because they have the motive to look at China's developmental experience, and looking at and to ask, how can I bring that experience or extract the part that is useful to contribute to my own country in some African countries or in Latin America. So very utilitarian. The interview shows you that most of the experts, wherever they come from in those contexts, their motives are very utilitarian. And very often, if they have the chance to really be able to visit China or to be educated in China, and their choice of being trained is always being trained in a more practical field. Actually, very few are trained as a Chinese, for instance, as a Chinese philosopher or Chinese historian. Very, very often they will pick the discipline of economics, business management, development studies. And you can, again, it's connected to what I said, this motive, very utilitarian motive. But then the problem here, if I can be very critical, is I find out maybe in the African continent as well as the Latin American continent, there is a lack of diversity of China expertise because too many are focusing on these very utilitarian disciplines such as economic and development and political science. And it would be better if the country want to know more about China, you should develop perhaps a diverse array of expertise who specialize in Mandarin language, in literature, in philosophy, in religions, in all other in all other spectrums, so that the society have a diverse expertise to understand China deeper, and then perhaps also can contribute to the ordinary people's view about China in a wider way beyond those utilitarian purposes. Yeah. So I see also one comment here that do China watchers have concerns about ordinary people's view about China? I think it's very difficult to generalize. It's very difficult to generalize, but I think, of course, in all societies, the public opinions do matters. Even in authoritarian regime, I would see public opinion does matter. So China watchers also gauge ordinary people's view about China, but also consider the elite's view, and then find a way to decide, depending on the country, decide which perspective or which view of China they want to present in their narrations. I hope I have answered Tokuhoro's question as well as one comment in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you did. Thanks, Julie. Maybe I should throw one last one, which I think also speaks to the methodology. I think you highlighted something interesting, which of course, some of us coming from anthropology and sociology, when we do ethnographic research, I think you talked about the idea of immersing, right? The immersion that you have with your field. And I think if we consider it in anthropology and sociology, immersion is actually something that's regarded as a methodological strength, that you have immersed yourself so much that you become sort of a quasi-member of the community that you are researching, and it's not really regarded as a weakness. But from the way you framed it in your work, it's sort of a pathologizing kind of framing of immersion. So I just wanted your thought with regards to that. When you immerse yourself very much with China, and then you risk being labeled as sympathetic and producing sinological kind of knowledge. I don't know if you have any reflections with regards to that.
Yeah, you find out that each China watcher has their own way of dealing with it. In a way, it's their career, it's their choice in their career. So, how much they want to be seen as being too immersed in the Chinese world, and how much they want to be seen as being distant. And I think every individual, considering their probably, I think, career opportunity and career development, they have made different choices. Yeah, and at least myself, and as well as I see a lot of scholars in Europe, in the West, the choices is always to keep that distance and no longer showing that you are immersed in it. But then from time to time, people do question you. So if you're not immersed in it, how much do you know China? If you are not immersed in it anymore, right? And and everybody has their own way around it. For instance, there are a lot of scholars nowadays, they're afraid to go to China because they are afraid to be detained and, or being followed. And myself, I also have that kind of worry. I would not say I'm immersed in the Chinese world that much anymore. And perhaps that's why I kind of advocate in the book that is immersed more with the countries, particularly the global South countries that have now new emerging and rising examples with China. We emerge with the audience in Kimberley, emerge with the audience in Harare, and see how they look at China from their perspective, and then to write China, to enrich the way we write about China. And perhaps that's a solution for my own dilemma here. Yeah, I humbly admit. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's. Thank you very much, Julie, for that. It's interesting, and I think it's like you framed it. It's a dilemma, and I think maybe let me just throw the follow up, which is the last one, which I think you highlighted that when you are within the networks of Chinese knowledge production, and especially in the West, it's largely framed maybe as a potential security risk. And I just wanted to pick your brain with regards to that. How does this framing of Chinese knowledge networks as potential security threats, especially within the West, how does it create new forms of epistemic containment, maybe in your own experiences?
Simba, I need your help. Can you specify a bit more? Maybe it's too
Yeah.
broad for me. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, I think you framed the idea of securitization towards the end of your presentation, and being in the networks of those that are producing knowledge about China, especially maybe sinological knowledge about China. They are viewed, especially in the West, as potential security risks. So would you think, maybe based on your own experiences, would you think that this is creating maybe a new form of epistemic containment, where, for instance, people become selective on what they do and what they produce about China and the kind of knowledge that they produce about China?
Yeah, I think you are definitely right. I think nowadays, scholars or think tankers or commentators, they are all becoming very selective. And I'm not so sure, but I have heard a lot that people are saying, in fact, the field of Chinese study itself is in decline. Because of you are being seen too much through the security lenses, and the government founders as well as the university feel like, well, why do we need to bother with if we have so much security concerns? So many people, I also wrote in my book, many interviewees feel like the funding to support the Chinese studies are in decline because of the securitized threats. I'm not so sure about the situation where you are, but I think this is very vivid in America as well as in Europe. And scholars are now trying to find a different path to continue their career. If this is no longer a viable career path, or what else can they do? I think people are really thinking carefully. I have known people who used to, for instance, work on very political sensitive issues about the Muslim minority in China, and now have clearly told me, and I include in my book, that I don't want to do this kind of research anymore. I only compare China's relationship with my own country, doing more like international relations kind of analysis. So completely switch the topic that they used to engage in. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julie, for that fascinating talk and sharing your work with us. We really appreciate that. And colleagues, thank you very much for joining and for staying up to the very end. This book that Julie was talking about is freely available, open access, and you can download that. I'll be happy to share with you guys, those that are interested in reading the book. Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Julie, for sharing the link. You can easily download the book. It's open access. So thank you very much, Julie. We really appreciate you making time on your very busy schedule to share your work with us. I'm sure we'll definitely call you back again when possible, whenever your time permits, to share your work with us as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for the audience. I have to say I humbly learned from you. And there's so much I didn't cover about Africa. Hopefully I will have the chance to visit South Africa again and then to continue the discussion. Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you, Simba. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much, colleagues. If you want to join our seminar and you want to be part of the mailing list, we'll share your emails and we'll definitely invite you for our upcoming seminars. And thank you very much for attending. We really appreciate. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.